And what they should do in this and that circumstance is an element of be careful, because tax advice is potentially regulated under anti-money laundering regulations. Compulsion is going to be put into play, and we're going to get caught out because it's sort of, I didn't know this was coming along and I haven't prepared for it. And it's not a 2-week turnaround either. So there's an element of payrolling is actually a little bit more complicated. It's slightly different than P11D. So people have to start to prepare.
Welcome to the Payroll Podcast, the show that explores the latest insights and innovations in the world of payroll. Hello everyone, and welcome back to March's edition of Payroll Question Time. My name is Nick Day. I'm here to guide you today through the latest significant developments in the payroll sector with the help, of course, of our expert panel who I'll introduce you to all soon. I'm just going to wait for everyone to join the webinar. We've got over 200 people have registered for today. I'm not sure everyone's going to join us, but we'll leave it a couple of moments just to get as many attendees online as we can. Of course, if anyone hasn't seen it yet, the HMRC did publish a new technical consultation, which is going to require businesses to change the information they provide to HMRC through PAYE and RTI returns, which does mean from April 25, employers are going to be required to provide more detailed information on employees' hours paid by RTI. Fortunately, they've confirmed the measure will not come into force any earlier than the start of the 25-26. However, I highlight it because it's exactly the kind of thing our panel are here to help you navigate. But more importantly, they're here to navigate the issues that are impacting you now. So we always say better to be prepared, better informed, the better we can manage our payrolls as well. And we know that you joining us today is an absolute, indication that you're all committed to payroll excellence and compliance. So Simon, actually offline a moment ago, was talking about the fact that online has been lots of discussion about the week 53 this week. Some saying that we might need to change the tax basis. Others saying we need to change the other things, which we're going to get into as well. I think there's even some auto-enrollment implications, which we'll tackle Andy with a little bit later. And also, just while we're waiting for people to join, I'm going to quickly highlight the fact that we are going to be running another webinar, which is actually an SD Works webinar alongside Deloitte and JJ Recruitment. In fact, my colleague Natalie, who's hosted this show in the past, is going to be running that as well on the 24th of April. So stay posted and I'll put that in the chat a little bit later if you're interested in that as well. Of course, PQT is all about your show, making sure we answer the questions that you need answered. So if you have something in payroll you want to know the answer to, that's what our panel are here for. Please do put your questions in the questions box. We'll do our best to answer them in real time. There is no such thing as a question that's bad or silly or anything like that. This is what we're here for. So if you have something you need the answer to, please do put it in the questions box. Do it sooner rather than later. It'll help me navigate those as we go through. There will be 2 polls today. So we want to hear your thoughts. We want to hear your opinions. When they go live, I will let you know, and we'll also comment on those results as well. We are, of course, recording this session, so you don't need to be scribbling lots of notes. We'll send you the slides after the recording is over. So please just pay attention, put those questions in, work with us, and we'll have a really, really great session today. And it's going to be finished with a survey. Now, this survey is all about making sure we include content that you want us to cover in future sessions. So please do take part in that survey when it comes through. Let us know what you want us to talk about, how you want us to challenge this wonderful panel in front of me so that we can answer those burning questions for you. And last but by no means least, I'm going to read out our legal disclaimer, which just says this presentation does not provide definitive answers to individual queries, and in some places takes views on matters which are uncertain. It is not intended to be relied upon in any specific context or as a substitute for seeking advice, legal or otherwise, on a specific circumstance, as each case may be different. Right, let's introduce you to today's panelists. My name is Nick Day. I am a recognized global payroll thought leader by Thinkers 360. I'm a proud member of the Award 300, and I host the Payroll Podcast, which is somewhere you can get this content on audio later on as well. I'm also the founder of JJ Recruitment, a specialist leading payroll recruitment agency with offices both in the UK and the US. I'm really passionate about raising the profile of payroll. I love hosting this show, which I've done now for almost a couple of years. And I've been in the industry for over 20 in total, which sounds like a lot until you realize just how much experience our panel have, which leads me to introduce our first guest, going from left to right as I see it, Mr. Simon Parsons. Can you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be with you again on another panel. Simon Parsons. I originally joined Centerfile, a precursor to SD Works, back in 1984. I joined their IT department, been involved in software development of payroll solutions ever since. Before I joined Centerfile, I was with Sun Alliance Assurance in their IT department, but I came in and I've also worked for Cyborg for a period of time. I have the Master of Science in Payroll Management. I'm part of Reward 300, as some of our other panelists are as well. And it's great to be with you. Yeah.
Fantastic. I'm moving from my left to right, Karen Thomson.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Karen Thomson. I'm one of the UK Payroll and Employment Tax Directors at AAB, an accountancy firm. I too am part of the Reward 300. I'm very proud to be so. I'm a chartered member of the Chartered Institute of Payroll Professionals. Been in payroll for 30 plus years, and that's all I'll say with the plus. I'm also a member, like Simon, on the Employment Payroll Group with HMRC's Forum, and I also sit on the Admin Burdens Advisory Board.
Fantastic. And our pensions expert, Andy Nicholls.
Hi, everyone. Yes, worked in payroll for many years. SSP, when SSP came in, was my first main job. You can look at that up and work it out, but it's slightly before Simon. And then started working for the pensions regulator as their payroll person, in effect, liaison with the industry. Back when automatic enrollment came in 2012 and been there since. I'm very happy to be here. Oh, fellow of the CIPP, but not 300 and not anything else really. So, but I'm here to yeah.
We'll nominate you for the next list, Andy.
We will, Andy. It's a travesty you're not in there already. Well, good to see. We've already started to have some questions put into our questions box. So if you put a question there, rest assured I will come to those in just a moment. Before we do, let's introduce today's discussion topics. Quite a lot to get through today. We're going to be talking about the budget impacts and changes to RTI, change to loan reports and salary advances, payroll mandating and tax status, an update from HMRC stakeholder event, the latest from the SD Works Academy, a pensions update from Andy at the end. And if we have time, which we often don't, but we'll give it our best, and we'll go through any other hot topics we haven't covered and go through a little Q&A as well. Of course, we will be asking questions in real time as we go through. If there is a question specifically related to one of those discussion topics, I may save it until we get to that section. If it's not, then I'll probably ask it as we go. So let's dive into our first section for today, which is the budget impact and changes to RTI. Simon, I'm going to start with you. Give us a little bit of an overview, and I'm going to have a look at these questions, and I'll start building from my side.
Yeah, sure. I can give you a view of some of the memories I have of our budget. So it's quite late, 6th of March. And it was quite a lengthy speech. He kept all the nitty-gritty bits that impact or we're interested in payroll right to the very end. But one of the announcements affects us generally as people, not really a payroll matter, is families and child benefit, to the extent that the 50,000 limit that currently applies, where you get a higher child benefit charge, has been risen or rising to 60,000, and in fact you can still benefit from child benefit up to 80,000, but with a tapered loss. So that should probably benefit a lot of families. In the future, it's changing. So at the moment, it's dealt with on an individual income, which of course means that a parent that is working who earns over £50,000 that has another parent that's looking after children or elder care who doesn't have income would lose the child benefit, whereas a household with two just under the higher rate would benefit from it, even though their income is almost twice as much. So I think there was proposals to address that by bringing in a family assessment at some point in the future. That's some years ago, but by raising the higher rate charge limit to 60,000, tapering up to 80,000. So that's one aspect. 0 hours. I'm not sure what the bit was about 0 hours, so the others may have to remind me. The Class 1 NIC reduction, yes, National Insurance was going to drop by another 2 percentage points, and an announcement that potentially the government were proposing to get rid of National Insurance altogether, referring it to it as a double taxation. I'm not sure that's necessarily 100% accurate in its description, but I guess that helps us reward people who are in work as opposed to giving tax breaks for those who are not. And also the impacts on self-employed. Yes, that's me as far as I'm going to give for the moment. Nick, I'll let some of the others have a word or two.
Okay, Karen, I'm going to come to you. I saw you nodding and agreeing with Simon as we went through. Anyway, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I think with the cost of living loan repayments, again, while not payroll, what the government have done is because they've extended the time by which people can take to repay back their loans. And forgive me from memory, I think it's gone from 12 months to 24 months for anybody that's in that space. The 0 hours, I'm sorry, I'm a bit like Simon. I think Richard put that in, so I do apologise. I've had a quick swizzle of thinking, okay, flexible working from day one, right, with some tips there. Obviously, the national insurance rates, hopefully, everybody got the second change in with a moment's notice in their software in time. I know that I'm very, very fortunate that we have. In fact, they're busy testing it as we speak. So we should be ready for the 6th of April when the new rate comes into force. But of course, I do feel for anybody where the software hasn't managed to get that in due to the late notice and the late budget for that kind of change. Normally we have those changes well in advance, but maybe because we let the Chancellor away with it in January, that he thought he would do it again in March. However, I will keep that back. And of course, when we're looking at RTI for pay-as-you-earn efficiency, I don't know if you want to cover this as well, Simon. I think here, but I'm thinking this is now going to be in relation to what's efficiency versus what HMRC wants in RTI, which I think is another subject matter coming.
Sure. I think we could spend a lot of time on that, on the the RTI changes for potentially 25 and other things. Yes. Yeah.
Any pensions considerations here, Andy, that need commentary?
Yeah, the Chancellor sort of reaffirmed this lifetime pension pot. So you have so you're an employee, you start with a company, you have your own pension, and as you move from company to company, your pension goes with you. And an employer pays into your pension, this lifetime model, which will be interesting if that actually, obviously, the very early days, it's not going to be instant, and it might not even be feasible, but it's going to be looked at by pension providers. Payroll-wise, think about it. If you had 1,000 employees, you could have 1,000 different pension schemes. But the other side of that is that TP are looking for value for money for pension schemes. So those pension schemes are not offering value for money will be closed. So maybe the whole pension industry will start to consolidate and become less and less pension schemes. So maybe that helps with this lifetime model if it was to take place. So it's quite a bit of interesting on a payroll.
Good. Well, we've had a couple of questions come in. I'll start with on the 0 hours piece. Jessica said, was the 0 hours getting rid of those type of contracts? ? 0 hours equals 13.07% for irregular workers. Simon?
Well, I'm not sure. I think there's certainly some Labour proposals on progressing stuff. I don't think that was necessarily the Chancellor, and that's why Karen and I are probably a little confused. The 13.07, well, there's a 12.07 in relation to holiday pay, accrual, etc. for 0 hours, which wasn't really anything to do with the budget. And again, we could talk for hours on that, because the proposal on the changes announced in the 1st of January. And by the way, if you're interested, the working time regulations have now been updated. So although they came into law on the 1st of January, the regulations then have a time lag. So you can't actually see what the law says, but you can now. They've been updated in relation to allowing accrual and rolled up holiday, if that's it. But there are considerations of limiting the 0 hours. There always have been. There have been some steps so far, and they're sort of discouraged, because I think the Office of National Statistics show that the average working week of a 0 hours contract is 25.5 hours. So on average, so most 0 hours workers are working quite a lot of hours every week. And I think that's an element of where the opposition will be coming in, saying, when we're in government, we're going to get rid of these because they're one-sided flexibilities that are not allowed. And that was potentially where the Matthew Taylor report was some years ago, pre-COVID, and there were steps being undertaken, but I think COVID came along and hit it a bit, and we didn't want to upset employers because everybody would be made redundant, and we needed to get and recover. Sorry, I'm just rambling on there a bit. I don't know if Karen may have some thoughts.
I was going to say, I saw the bit on, it was the Laura Kingsburg show. Yes, please don't judge me on that on a Sunday morning. And it was where I think she was interviewing the Shadow Chancellor, and what she was saying was she would abolish 0-hour contracts in consultation with employers. But then some of the feedback that I was reading on social media around that was there is a danger of doing that, because as you just pointed out, that if the average is 25, if you take some large, hospitality chains, let's call them, they may just decide if we've got to put somebody on a contract, they would put them on a contract of very minimum hours, because they then have to guarantee those hours. Rightly or wrongly, I have no view, but that's where that's coming. But there's been a bit of, what would the impact be of what would employers do if they were to do that? And then, of course, there's the other side where a lot of employees like 0 hours, students and so forth, because it suits them. So it'll be interesting, I think, if that is what that was relating to. It'd be interesting to see, well, one, what comes out after the general election, and secondly, if this is then on a radar, what that might look like.
Well, there's been a little bit of a light bulb moment here, because Jessica's just said, that's what I heard, Karen. So there you go. We're happy. Been a couple of questions that have come in as well. I'm going to just run through these, not necessarily related specifically to any of the areas we're chatting about today. Joanna has said, we may have to process some off-payroll workers. Can we simply add them to our SDW payroll, ticking the off-payroll box on their record, and process them on our monthly payroll? Sounds like an SD Works question, Simon, so I'll come to you for that.
Certainly, yes. So we have the IR35 capabilities or off-payroll working capabilities. Just make sure that you get the assessment correct and that they are. And of course, you need to ensure you've got pay elements there to deal with the component parts. So, for example, there's usually an expense associated with IR35, even if it's the VAT charge, because the VAT charge wouldn't be subject to income tax. So you can set up a non-payable, well, not non-payable, you can set up a non-taxable, non-deniable item that won't be assessed for the IR35. The capabilities there, if you want some assistance or advice, we've got teams that can assist and direct in that. But IR35, yes, I would have thought a fair number of pay solutions these days will handle it. Now, Andy may have a comment here, I don't know, on IR35, because IR35 cases are not employees or workers. Potentially, they're actually employers and workers of their own businesses, but they're off-payroll workers. They're kind of treated as an employee, but only for tax and national insurance purposes. For employment rights, they don't have any with the engager, unless, of course, they've messed up on their contract position.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, I mean, pension won't apply normally, as in is the sort of like a limited company being employed, but being treated as if they're an employee. But obviously that company, if it's a sole director only, they'll be excluded. But if there's multiple employees or employed directors, then potentially that company will have automatic enrollment duties for their own staff, but not yourselves processing the IR35 person through SD Works payroll.
Yeah, they're not entitled to holiday, they're not entitled to sickness, they're not entitled to pensions, really. But I see often some companies actually do provide those sorts of benefits, but and I don't, Nick, there's elements of caution there, because are they really running their own business, and are they really an employee, not an off-payroll?
But that's a constant caution with any IR35 process, right? That we need to make those assessments correct. There's always a level of ambiguity. Question for you then, Karen. Let me just grab this back up because I can't read the whole thing. Years ago, hold on, can't see it. Years ago was overpaid salary. Left the company and was asked to pay the funds back. So assuming years ago, a colleague or there was an overpaid salary. They left the company and was asked to pay the funds back. The colleague said they could only afford to do so in small amounts, so the repayment is still taking place today. I'm wondering how I'll be able to reverse the earnings out of their pay record once the overpaid salary is fully repaid. That makes sense.
Yeah. Don't we just love overpayments? Well, there's two, again, Simon will have a view, I'm sure. There are two sort of rules here, or different ways that you could approach this. So many, many, many years ago, Simon, you'll remember Margaret Knights from HMRC. And she confirmed in writing that an employer actually had the opportunity that as long as everything possible had been done to recover the debt, so whether you've got a payment plan such as this or there was a refusal, but you've done everything possible, you could have actually reversed it. You could have actually made the records right at the time. Now, the fact that I'm assuming based on what you've just asked there, that are you doing...
Which may help, Karen, just to give this. I couldn't see it at the start. I can see it now. It says I've inherited a situation where a former colleague from a few years ago was overpaid salary. So I don't know if that makes any difference to the question.
Yeah, I mean, it depends. I mean, assuming here that the payroll wasn't corrected to reflect what would have been the earnings without that overpayment at the time. And if that is the case, now obviously I don't know what software you use or whether you could do this, but what effectively you would be looking to do in reality is change each of those tax years as you know, so if you imagine, if let's say it was £300 over 3 years, so effectively you'd be looking at each tax year and reducing it down by £100 to get the tax and the national insurance back. But the fact that you will have given her a net overpayment amount, or you should have done, then in reality there's no tax and nix due back to that individual as such, because you've given net. But then, of course, with the revenue, as you then start to correct it, you would be due to make sure that that individual did receive back anything that they had paid. So it will depend on what was done, how you're dealing with it now with your software, but you will need to correct the records with HMRC. But it's just really for anybody else, you can correct the records at the time that you write to say there's an overpayment. I mean, different if they're still employed, you wouldn't, you would just keep amending it as you do. But the point at which they leave, but you can amend it at the time. So just bear that in mind. I'm not sure whether that's in the CWG too. Although actually I've just realised I've got one in the background, but it's many years old. But I do recall I've probably still got the text from the confirmation of HMRC that you could do that. So if you want to take it offline and chat to myself or Simon, more than happy. But the circumstances will depend. But Simon, have you got a view on that?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think it was my letter that Margaret Knights was responding to. So I wrote to her quite some years ago, and it was verified when we went through the RTI stakeholder groups that was still valid. The HMRC guidance sometimes infers something else, but the policy position hasn't changed. So an overpayment is not earnings; it's a mistake. The challenge is that if you don't recover or don't intend to recover, it becomes earnings. So, and that's the important factor of Margaret's response on behalf of HMRC at the time. So, in theory, if you've overpaid someone, when can you recover the tax and NI associated with that? Immediately. Do you need to have waited for the repayment to occur? You don't. But you do have to have an intent to recover. And there's also an element in Margaret's response that if you don't manage to recover, does that change it? And potentially it doesn't. If it reaches a point where it would just cost you so much to recover the amount, to the extent that you make a loss, could you write it off? And I think the answer really is yes, but there's an element, and you wouldn't have a tax and NI liability on that. But that has to be a reasonable basis, and so there's some element. But if you don't intend on recovering the amount of money, or you're going to write off a significant proportion, that then becomes taxable income. So just bear in that. So it's a little bit of trickery, but if you have an intent to recover and you're going to try to recover, even if you don't, you can immediately correct. You don't have to wait, because I think, as Karen's sort of intimating, to actually go back 3 or 4 years correcting will cost you a phenomenal amount of effort and expense. So is it worth it? And I think there's an element of fix it immediately, or stick with it and you've paid it to them. That's the element. So you should only really have it taxed and denied going forward if you don't intend to recover it.
Okay, Super. Well, we're going to go to a poll shortly. Before we do, we're going to go to our next section. I'll highlight the poll because we've got a couple of questions that come in predominantly for you, I think, Andy. So we're going to pause those just for a minute until we get to that poll. So thank you, Janice and Emma. We'll come to those shortly. But let's jump into our next section, a change to loan reports and salary advances. So, Simon, what are the changes?
Okay, well, this is legislation that's actually just been passed, I think. I think it came into force, was it this week? Or it actually comes into force next week, but was laid this week. It relates on draft regulations that went in. So I think this is about, I'm going to call it, I forgot what they call the stupid things now, the likes of salary advances, early wage access schemes, aren't they? So early wage access schemes that actually, when they looked at the legislation, they found that there was actually, if you're going to call it earnings, there was a legal obligation to report on or before the payment via FPS. So all of those that have been using early wage access solutions may suddenly have found that you should have been reporting to HMRC the income. And potentially it may have been subject to tax and national insurance. And so they brought in new legislation to allow early wage access schemes to occur, and that actually the taxation point becomes the normal point when the proper wages are paid, that you apply the tax and NI and report it. So those are the changes pretty much. There is a relaxation on that basis. There are areas that are still outstanding. So Karen will know that there's a series of questions that have been asked by the EPG, especially by myself on the EPG, where we actually haven't had satisfactory answers, and which is troubling at times. And that is, what's the implication on national minimum wage law? Because if it's deemed that it's earnings paid at that point, how does that work for the PRP? And equally, lots of these schemes charge a fee. They're employer schemes, so does that fee actually reduce earnings for national minimum wage purposes? Because the way the law is written, it might, but we can't get an answer. It's sort of, well, when we suddenly do an audit and look at it, we'll make a decision and, oh, you're on the naughty list, published by the DBT for underpayments. So there is some element of whether that's where pay is close to national minimum wage levels. Karen may have some thoughts as well. And there's always a bit of a pensions angle to these sorts of things. So if they're actually earnings.
We're getting some pensions questions coming in as well. So Andy's going to be busy in just a minute.
Yeah.
Karen, any other impacts on pay on demand before we jump into the pension side?
No, I agree entirely with Simon, and it is very disappointing that the questions that are being asked, particularly around national minimum wage, and given there's a lot of media around, the naming and shaming was just recent, over 500 employers named and shamed and for not getting things right. So it's quite a critical moment, and not to get the answers that we've been, Simon in particular, all credit to Simon for the list of questions, I might add. But at least I suppose there's one saving grace. It is on record that these are being asked at EPG should something come out in the future. But it's a watch this space, and we hope that one day we will get those answers and be able to share them.
Right, and Andy, you're about to say something, and I cut you off.
Yeah, obviously this is like salary advances, early wage access, or whatever you want to call it. The thing is that if the person's not in a pension scheme and you're giving these advances and you haven't built in a potential pension calculation, when it comes to running a payroll, they then get automatically enrolled, and the pension's due on all the pay for that month, that pay period, and maybe the advances are such that there's not sufficient. I mean, it's unlikely, but maybe, so it's just a thought, really. I think the regulator would follow suit. We initially were thinking, if you're accessing wage early in its earnings, you should be doing the assessment for automatic enrollment at that point, and multiple assessments depending upon how many times they access their wage. But if we're treating it purely as salary advances, then obviously the assessment would fall into the normal pay run process.
Right. Well, let's get our audience involved. Isn't it?
Yes.
127 of you are online at the minute. Let's get you all involved in our first poll for today, which is a simple one for today. Do you currently record contractual hours within a payroll or HR system? 4 options for those in audio only. We've got payroll, HR, both, or none. So that's payroll, HR, both, or none. Do you currently record contractual hours within a payroll or HR system? While we're waiting for those poll results to come in, I'm going to go through a couple of questions that have come in. So probably back to you, I think, Andy. I haven't read it all through yet, but it says, regarding the lifetime pension pot, ... Do we know yet if employers are potentially going to have to pay into multiple different pension pots in line with their paydays, e.g. on a monthly basis, depending on where a new employee holds their pension pot? If this is the case, it is going to be a nightmare to reconcile multiple different payments to different providers on a monthly basis. Can you help?
I think that is a logical conclusion of it. Really, it depends how many pensions are around at the point at which, if this actually takes off, because it may not take off, it's going to be consulted with the pensions industry, and payroll will certainly feed into that, and employers. So if it was to take place, then each individual could in theory have their own pension pot, which the employer would then be paying into, and you could have as many employees, could be as many pension schemes. So yes, I'm sure your feedback into any consultation that might come up in the future will be very helpful in sorting out that.
Okay, fab. And another one related to the pensions regulator, so definitely one for you, Andy. It says, with the change in May from the pensions regulator asking us to submit the pensionable earnings for our workers each period, I wanted to check with you what the reported value should be if the contributions in the scheme are calculated using qualifying earnings. For example, someone earns 1,000 in the month, but the pension contributions are only calculated after the lower level of 520.
Yeah, it's not the pensions regulator telling you that. It's actually, we've told the pension scheme. So the pension schemes have a requirement to ensure that the right amount of money is paid in at the right time. And we will say, so the regulator will say to the pension scheme, what have you got in place to check that that is happening? And so it sounds like to me that the pension scheme have said that they need to add to the file of the data file that comes in, pensionable earnings, in order for them to confirm that, or at least do more checks to confirm the right amount of money is being paid in at the right time. So if the value they're asking for is the pensionable earnings, then chances are it'll be the 480 figure. But look to see what they've instructed you to do. Because so go back to the pension scheme and say, look, we got 1,000, or is it 480? Chances are it'll be 480, but if it's not clear, then go back to them and ask them, the pension provider, that is.
Okay, fab. And last question while we're waiting for these poll results to come in. An employee started on the 13th of March, but our March payroll deadline had passed. As a result, her next pay in April will include half of March and a full month of April. The problem is she has no other earnings in 23-24, so no tax would be payable, as it would be covered by her personal allowance. Now she will be taxed in the new year on that March element. How easy is it to correct this? Perhaps I'll come to you for that one, Simon.
Well, I'm not sure there's anything to correct, and it's an element of falling under the CWG2 guidance in the fact that the taxation point is the point of payment. So it's not about when you worked, but when it's paid. So I think it's just a reality of the missing of the deadline, that it's actually assessed in the next period for both. There is a concession for national insurance contributions to the extent that you do 2 periods separately, but you actually use the current rates at the point of the payment. So there isn't anything really to correct. It might seem they've been disadvantaged by that, but it missed the deadline. And so that's the reality of the PAYE regulation application, is that it's assessed at the point of payment.
Sure. Fab. And last but not least, does HMRC want contractual hours or worked hours on trips from April 25?
Yeah, who knows? It's difficult to understand what on earth they're after, to be honest. They're after work. They're after paid worked hours is the indication at the moment. And I was going to say, and Karen will be aware because she may have been on some same consultations, the discussions that I have. And I think we've had, I've been involved in about 3 so far. I've got to be careful to a certain extent what I say, I guess, because sometimes they'll congratulate you for raising a point that they've not heard before. You think, but I've raised it at the prior two consultations meetings that we've had. So this is actually the third time, but they act as if it's the first time it's ever been pointed out. But because they get mixed messages is just a feeling I have at the moment. Karen may have a different view, because they're kind of saying, well, what do you do if someone's sick or on holiday? Well, if you've paid them hours for sickness and holiday, then you report those hours. And it's sort of, there aren't any hours when you're on sickness or holiday, you haven't worked. You might be getting pay, might be based on some sort of assumptive hours. It's got nothing to do with working. And I think it's all getting a little bit confusing at the moment. So as far as I'm aware, it is hours paid that's to be reported in relation to work. That's the default position I'm starting to take, although some of the guidance is a bit mixed.
Fantastic. And someone's just come back saying, thanks, Simon, I wasn't aware of the date issue. That was the prior question. Let's quickly go back to these poll results. The question, of course, is, do you currently record a contractual hours within a payroll or HR system? I'm going to come to Karen to comment on the results if we can, because Karen, I wonder if you can just give a bit of an overview as to why we asked this question, and then perhaps we can disseminate the results as well if you can. Over to you.
Yeah. Well, it's in relation to what Simon was just describing in answer to the last question. So this is about HMRC improving the data that they collect from customers. It is on, as well as the EPG road, and like Simon, been in numerous meetings. It's also on the Admin Burdens Advisory Board's remit. And the reason for that is because it's very difficult to understand why HMRC wants this information. So the technical consultation, which I've actually got up on my screen here, it's actually sort of saying where the amount of payment is determined by applying an hourly rate of pay. Well, we have to do that now. So if you in hours, you have to. So there's very little difference there. But this is where the bit of contractual, where the amount of payment is determined by reference to a period of time. So that's piecework, for example. We have to put nil hours in. So this is where one of the issues is that we're recording the number of hours worked within the employee's contract, with the employer requires the employee to work over that period. So in other words, we're going to be putting in the hours in an employee's contract, and then any overtime would be recorded. However, one of the biggest questions is, for example, and it says in that pay period, the pay reference, which is, again, that's quite crucial, because if you have somebody on a 37.5 hours per week, so let's say for ease, 5 days at 7.5 hours, and there's 22 days in the month, well, actually, you're going to end up be paying for, there's for 165 hours, whereas 37.5 times, let's say, in weeks, let's say, might be less. So how are we going to record that? So even if we put in the system, we have the ability to, and I can see here 64% seem to be recording it in both, which is encouraging. As an agent, we're going to have to collect this data from clients. So anybody on the webinar where you are an agent, just bear that in mind. And 2025 is, in my mind, just a tad too soon to be able to get this information, especially when the technical consultation has only just been published.
Hello, HR and people leaders. Are you not exhausted from the endless war for talent battle cries? I think it's time for a fresh approach, which is why at JGA Recruitment, we understand the real challenges you face in sourcing top HR talent. And guess what? We believe we have the solution. Our team is on a mission to revolutionize your hiring process, because we're not just recruiters. We're strategic partners dedicated to finding the best HR and people professionals who align perfectly with your company's vision and goals. Let's break the cycle of frustration together. Join forces with JGA Recruitment and experience the difference in hiring better talent faster. Don't let another day go by without taking action. Contact us today by visiting jgarecruitment.com to discover how we can transform your HR team. And here's a bonus. When you visit us, why not sign up for our weekly HR newsletter? Because it's packed with invaluable industry insights and more. We really hope you can revolutionize your HR department by working with JGA Recruitment. Contact us today.
And the responses aren't due by, early May. So there's not a lot of time to actually get systems done and then actually collect the data. But where Simon was saying about sickness and maternity, or for example, if somebody's an office holder, or the component that you're using as a benefit in kind, 0 hours needs to be, or nil needs to be put against that. So now we're looking at components having something with hours attached to it in order for it to be 0. Now, obviously, payroll software is working on this, hard, but it's just really to sort of as a heads up, there's quite a lot of controversy around this in the professions, both in the employment taxes professions and the payroll professions. And unfortunately, it doesn't appear, there's many who will have this perhaps in an HR system, but some may just have it in the actual contract of employment. So it's not in any system at all. So it's going to be, but this is hours, it's going to be contractual hours plus presumably overtime addition. But yeah, somebody's on maternity, they're on sickness. So in other words, they're receiving no pay, that you're going to have to put nil. So this is quite a lot of admin. And so the question being asked, as you would expect by the Admin Burdens Advisory Board, is, well, what are the costs for employers doing this? And what are the benefits? And as yet, I haven't heard a satisfactory explanation as to why HMRC want to collect this data. But it's for national minimum wage, it's not going to work.
So
not hours, and then what's paid.
And for those that are in audio only, the results that came back on whether they can't record contractual hours in the payroll HR system, 10% was payroll, HR was 20%. As Karen rightly said, 64% was both, and 6% was none. I've had a question just come in, Karen, I'll come back to you just for a moment if I can. It says, surely you may not have the hours at real time and would be a month behind. Will that be acceptable?
Well, this is, again, as Simon's just said, we have unanswered questions. We don't know, because if somebody's contractual, then obviously you're just going to be able to put in whatever's in the contract. It doesn't mean that it's what they've worked. It just means what they're contracted to work. Where you're talking about is variable hours. So you will put in, it's if you're putting in hours and a rate of pay like we do now, it's that pay period. They are the hours for which you are paying. But you're quite right, it's not the period in which they've worked them necessarily. So
and
there's far more work to be done on this.
Quick question, which probably answered that last one in relation to the work, which just says, where can we find more guidance on the changes to reporting now, or is this not going to be available until May? I don't know if I know you said you opened up something there, Karen. Isn't that successful for everyone or not?
It's the technical consultation I've opened up. I'll happily put the link in for you, Nick, to be able to share it.
Fabulous. Put it in a chat and I'll share it with everyone here. If they want to read through that, I'll leave that to them. Well, brilliant. Well, let's move on then to the next section. We've got another poll coming up soon. Thank you, everyone. I think 90% of you voted, which is absolutely fantastic. That's a really good result. The next section of today's session is going to be talking about payroll mandating and tax status with the third wave due late summer. Simon, back to you. Can you navigate us through?
Sure. I think it's something we've probably covered before, but one of the other announcements that was made just before the budget and confirmed in the budget and has been confirmed since is the intention, because we've had the employer bulletin this week and the agent bulletin, was it last week or the week before, the intention that payrolling benefits of kind will be compulsory, so mandatory within payroll from April 2026. And also there's an extension of 2 benefits which cannot currently be given. So there's lots of things that are starting to come in. The other area of consultation, which is also announced and part of that series, is the third consultation on the tax advice market. At the beginning, we cleverly put a disclaimer in on this presentation today, Nick, because none of us are actually giving any tax advice or financial advice, and Andy will probably tell us he's not giving us any pensions advice as well, because they're generally regulated activities and we'd have to perform a due diligence, be qualified, obtain who you are, whether you're connected to the Russians or not, and certain information. However, we can talk about these things in general terms and subjects, but the third consultation on the tax advice market has been issued, which clearly has in scope payroll and payroll services. So, which would mean some of its proposals that anybody giving tax advice has to be a member of a regulating professional body. Now, I don't know of one for payroll. We have a professional body, but it's not a regulating professional body, and it doesn't regulate practice. It's a membership of people. So there's an element of, well, there's a massive, great big tax collector here that's, and looking at some of the social media discussions, even on week 53 and stuff like that, that's been going round about all these employers that are wanting to tell their employees exactly how tax is calculated and what they should do in this and that circumstance. There's an element of be careful, because tax advice is potentially regulated under anti-money laundering regulations. Are you allowed to give it? And traditionally, payroll has been excluded from the AML if there is no tax advice provided. But the open consultation is there, and quite clearly we in target. The thing I don't get about this, and Karen may have some thoughts as well, is they have been told now 3 times, yet they seem to ignoring that representation. And from the very beginning, there was an element of a request to find out what tax advice actually is. And to date, I'm still not sure we've actually seen any definition, but it does sort of imply that interaction with HMRC is a tax advisor. So was that filing RTI files? Is that phoning them up and asking a question? So again, lots of unanswered questions really on this one, Nick, but it's gone to its 3rd stage. So it's an element of there's something going to be coming out which might impact us all.
Fantastic. I saw, again, Karen smiling and still nodding there. Anything you'd like to add to that, Karen?
Well, as Simon says, I think it's, you've sort of got one, is this going to enhance the skills of payroll? But we would need to do that and regulate. But as Simon says, we're not regulated. So who's going to make sure? One of the main reasons for them looking at this is bad advisors, is, people advising people to do things that they shouldn't perhaps be doing. So, okay, who's going to regulate us? But then there's also the other concern, it's payrolling of benefits. At the moment, we've had quite a clear line that says, well, we will process payrolling of benefits. We do not advise an employer, a client, what have you, on what they should or should not do in that space. Just if you have a company car, we can process it, for example. So if they then do bring us into scope for advice, well, what does that mean? As Simon says, what is that definition? It could be different for many. And then if it is, does that mean employers and or clients will start to expect us to advise on their benefits in kind because we are processing it so it'll have this natural fit? Whereas in fact, tax advisors on the whole do their qualifications, work very hard, do many years of experience and have insurance to do just that. So it's an interesting time. But Simon says time and time again, we have, the industry has been represented by many of us, and still we're on the 3rd draft and payroll still in scope.
Any pension considerations here, Andy, you'd like just to add on? I've got a question that's come in, but I'll come to that in just a moment. I'll come to you first, Andy.
Yeah, any advice to employees is covered and needs to be done by an IFA approved person. So it's regulated. Employer to employer conversations on pensions isn't regulated, but obviously that's down then to agreement between those employers and SLAs and everything else, So even if you don't think it's regulated, you've got all the contractual things in place. So beware. From our perspective, from a regulator perspective, the employer should give the facts to the individual. You've been enrolled into this scheme. You've got the right to opt out. If you want to opt out, contact the pension provider. And then that's it. So give the facts. It's not advice.
Yeah, as Simon said, we've covered this before. But it's always worth reminding so we don't get ourselves into hot water. So a question that's come in from Rachel. It says, we have a 2P later this year who payroll benefits we currently still P11D. It doesn't look like you can register to payroll benefits for one group of employees and not the rest. Is there a way around this? We have circa 7,000 and you can only exclude 300 people. I saw you nodding, Simon, so I'll come to you for that.
Yeah. Well, you can exclude. So I'm going to give an opinion here. So I think don't take too much to it on the currently. if you didn't payroll and you submitted P11Ds, would that be okay? I think for the moment, until 26, 27, which will be the July 27 submission, you're good to go, because even those for leavers maternity cases, you may have to P11D now. So for the extras, but the payrolled element, you don't need to P11D. Can you exclude groups? I understand what you're saying. You can actually exclude online. You're saying it's limited. I wouldn't pay too much attention to that. So could you have a group that are payrolled and a group that aren't, which is sizable more than that? I'd suggest you can. Don't worry too much about the nitty-gritty of the online system. Of course, the registration process for April 26 will be, there isn't one, because you don't need to anymore, because everyone has to do it. I don't know if you got thoughts. Karen will do these as well, on more of the actual level of cases, won't you?
Yeah, the thing is, I mean, I didn't know, I'll be honest with you, I didn't know there was a limit of 300. I thought no matter what your payroll was, you could then just tick the employees that weren't going to be included. So that's maybe one way. But of course, with TUPE, the bit to watch is I don't know what's been agreed as far as the employment law side of it goes. So I'm going to steer clear of that one, as we don't have an employment lawyer on the panel today, simply because it will depend on what's in that. So if you're having to do payrolling, and it's going to be under your pay-as-you-earn reference and you are not registered, just be mindful your deadline is fast approaching, the 5th. It doesn't take long to do. It really doesn't, to register. But if you think you're going to have to do it for this group of employees, quickly get registered. It is really quite straightforward to do. And then you can concentrate on looking at who you're going to exclude. But I would suggest you'd have to put everybody in and then exclude the ones that you're going to P11D for, if I remember rightly. So I'm trying to think, it's quite some years since I've done a registration personally, but I didn't know that there was a limit. So I think it's that. So if there isn't a TUPE that's forcing you to payroll of benefits, your alternative, probably not the best for those employees perhaps, is you P11D everybody until such time of payrolling. So I think you've got some options, but it will maybe depend on what that TUPE is saying.
Fantastic. Well, let's jump into our next poll again. Really good engagement last time. It's also a great time to put your questions in the box. We're waiting for the results to come in. We can fly through a couple of questions. If you've got any more, do put them in as we go. Next poll is, how do you think payroll mandating will impact your business? 3 options here: positively, negatively, or not sure yet. So how do you think payroll mandating will impact your business? Positively, negatively, or not sure yet? While we're waiting for those results to come in, our next section is going to be talking about the HMRC stakeholder event. And I think we've gone through most of the questions at the minute. So perhaps while we're waiting for that to come in, Simon, you give us a bit of an overview of the HMRC stakeholder event, which is due to take on the February 29th.
So Karen and I were both at the stakeholder event. It was great to be invited along. We're at the Queen Elizabeth II Centre. Can't remember which floor we were on, but a number of rooms there. And we had Jim Harrow and others that were there presenting. Predominantly, the government are pushing forward, or HMRC are pushing forward with everything being digital. So they're trying to get the populace onto digital, of course, with protections for those that can't be, but certainly moving a lot more services into a future state. Of course, there are elements of risk and concern that were also discussed. So we had presentations in relation to there are certain agents out there who potentially are doing things that wouldn't want to be occurring, which is probably partly why the tax advice consultation is out, although doesn't seem to reference those players at all. But others that it's a bit like going to an airport. We all have to go through security, but the terrorists don't, sort of thing. Because they can go through because they got a key to a side door. But yes, identity was certainly an area they're focusing on, and so that people can easily identify themselves by asking a series of questions, getting everything much more done digitally so that you can request things all online. I've got to say there's a few cases that have pointed out to them where actually it's been very difficult, for example, for a divorced lady to change her name back. But again, the personal tax account there, demonstrations on how some of the tax coding has got better. A lot of the sessions were on other taxation matters. It just wasn't about PAYE. It would have been about VAT, import duties, all sorts of things, because they're all handled by HMRC these days. And also the cyber, I attended one on the cyber type threats and position, because it sounds as if HMRC get threats every day. So you'll probably seen in the news about one of the Scottish NHS that have had data leaked out or published by a certain hacking group. But there certainly seem to be a predominance of attacks and how you prevent them, which is also a concern to HMRC at times, because there'll be agents trying to break in, which they're resisting. On the whole, you have systems and solutions that will resist it very well, but that takes quite a bit of effort. Hope Karen may have gone to different sessions than I did.
Yeah, I think for me,
70% have voted yet. So yeah, Karen, you give us a bit more insight. If we can get the whole 100% of votes. Yeah, Karen, any insights?
I agree with Simon. An awful lot of focus on digital, focus on how they want to try and best serve their customers, and obviously you won't be surprised away from the phone lines and what have you. Very much promoting the app for HMRC apps. If you don't have it, it's worth having a look for. And maybe encourage employees because they can see their tax codes. But one of the fascinating ones, and how HMRC are working globally, so with lots of different tax authorities. So, they're learning from best practice, or, so what's somebody else done in another country that perhaps we could adopt here. And I think, again, more positively to hear, given HMRC's constraints around security, which, as Simon's just said, they're being hacked on a regular basis. I think given the last 10 days and what we've seen in the payments world of retailers and so forth, I think many are. But with that security in mind, it is very difficult for HMRC to allow people in. But they are looking at ways in which they can work with partners, whether that be software providers. So at the moment, we submit data by doing something. Will there become a day where we can use, you could use SD Works and it just happens? And that would be something I think we'd all love to see in the future for those particularly who are working with the world of AI. So there were some fascinating things. So not just the here and now, but actually looking at the future, which was encouraging to hear.
Good. Well, I've certainly seen lots of reports about moving towards a touchless payroll in the future. So we'll have to see how that goes. Let's have a look at these poll results then. We've had 75% votes, was about 85 of you have come into this poll. So how do you think payroll mandating will impact your business? For those in audio only, 33% said positively, 12% said negatively, and 56% said not sure yet. What are your thoughts on those, Karen?
I'm not surprised yet. I mean, they're not sure yet. If somebody's not doing it, then clearly, it's something that can be difficult to see, or if you don't have benefits in kind. So I think it might come down to, if you're producing lots of P11Ds, how time consuming is that, an admin burden and so forth, versus putting something through every month. I mean, obviously with the mandation of payrolling of benefits, there are a couple of complexities that I still think need ironed out around the loans and accommodation. But in addition, of course, you will be processing Class 1A each pay period as well, which will also be a change. So I'm not surprised with the results. I think it's something that, let's watch this trend and see what happens.
Super. Well, let's jump back into the slides then. I think we've covered the HMRC stakeholder event. Well, before we jump into the next one, I was just interested to see. Sorry, Simon, you've got a point to raise.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's an interesting result. I think it's an interesting result on the hours as well. I think that the challenge we're facing is we're going to face some fiscal deadlines where compulsion is going to be put into play, and we're going to get caught out because it's sort of, I didn't know this was coming along and I haven't prepared for it. And it's not a 2-week turnaround either. So there's an element of payrolling is actually a little bit more complicated. It's slightly different than P11D. So people have to start to prepare. And even with the hours reporting, and I guess that's our nervousness, isn't it, Karen, is we don't know what you want reported yet it's next April. Our time attendance systems linked to payroll, linked to HR, linked to whatever. And for many people, certainly the bureau organisations have got no idea what the hours are because they're not delivered. We're just given a cash amount to pay. So I think we're in a point of moving where we have to increasingly become engaged because we'll have an impending deadline with no plan to achieve it.
Yeah. Right. Well, let's introduce what is the new webinar that I mentioned in my introduction earlier. It's a webinar between, in combination with SDWorks and Deloitte. I would say it's unmissable because we've got some fantastic speakers on that webinar. It's going to be focused on how best to integrate managed payroll into your HR ecosystem. And it's going to be hosted by Natalie Lloyd, one of my colleagues here at JJ Recruitment. And I think, let's be honest, with some news that's come out this week with the ASDA situation where the payroll systems perhaps weren't quite ready and we ended up with a big issue with some incorrect pay slips and things. I think this is the kind of webinar now that's really more important than ever because we know that if we get this wrong, we can be front page news if people's pay aren't correct and we don't get the systems integrated as well as we could do. And I think most people that haven't seen it, it was front page news really because a lot of 9,500 people potentially impacted by that system change. They thought that the checks had been made, but obviously didn't quite work out. So I wondered, Simon, obviously as someone who's at SDWorks, if you can give us a bit of an introduction into that webinar about why it might be important for people to attend and perhaps what we can take away from it.
Well, yes, I think increasingly it goes along with some of the steps that we've just talked about as well as where governments are going, because you've got quite a pan-European group here as well in this discussion on it, because it affects other European nations, not just the UK, of the increasing requirement of overlap between managing humans under an HRM sort of process and payroll together, paying them. Whereas before, you said 20 years ago, two didn't really talk to each other apart from just flinging some data across. We don't really want to meet them. Now there's very much of who is doing what because activity is integrated and crossing. And then that goes into the whole element of now, instead of having separate, disparate technology, you now need that into one HR ecosystem sort of element, and also the process and how that aligns equally with compliance, which is my area of speciality.
Yeah, well, that's why I raised the ASDA situation, because that was related to a launch of a new HR system, of course. And we now see more collaboration and cross-pollination between payroll and HR than we've ever seen before, and a lot more things being integrated. So I think this is a webinar that if anyone's watching this and is interested in how you can integrate your systems more effectively, then it's a webinar that I would highly recommend you attend and take the findings from with some real leading industry experts there. It's on the Wednesday, the 24th of April. It's at 11 o'clock. I will put a link in just a moment into the side chat panel. So if people want to sign up directly, you can, so that you can actually get ahead of the curve here and get up a little bit early. And while we're on the subject of brilliant webinars and brilliant trainings and other things you can attend, let's have a talk about the SDWorks Academy, something that's ever increasing in popularity, I understand, Simon. You've got a number of sessions coming up. On the 12th of April, there's a session on holiday pay. The 16th, UK Payroll Part 1, Income Tax and National Insurance. 17th of April, UK Payroll Part 2, Starters and Leavers, Student Loans and Statutory Payments. 26th of April, National Minimum Wage, Advanced. The 14th of May, UK Payroll Part 1, Income Tax and National Insurance. The 15th of May, UK Payroll Part 2, Starters and Leavers, Student Loans and Statutory Payments. 17th of May, Directors National Insurance. And the 24th of May, Salary Sacrifice. What is it and why? While I pick up those the calendar links for those that may be interested in any of those courses, I'll put in the chat box. Simon, I wonder if you can give us a little bit more of an overview, and I'll put this in the chat box for everyone to sign up.
Yeah, sure. So the SDWorks Academy is fairly new. It was introduced just over 12 months ago. In fact, it's probably just under 12 months, to be honest. I think we take on the LMS service in February last year and then developed it very quickly. We've got an excellent trainer. So if you've got new people who are wanting to have an introduction to payroll and how it operates, the UK Payroll Part 1 and 2 are great days. trainer is known by Karen and I very well, that comes along, has done for a number of organisations, provide her years of expertise across in a way that people can understand. The other topics are dealt with by Ben and myself. We're the Payroll, HR and Legal Services team, going into a little bit more detail on the changes, especially with the change in law that's come into play with accrual and rolled up holiday. So important. I wish I'd run the Directors National Insurance one in March. We've had so many questions in March. Obviously, it's an area that people don't understand, especially when they've gone from the alternate method to the annual method. They're denying that that's right, when actually that's the law. That's what you have to do, and wondering why there's been this recalculation. In fact, I've had so many questions on why the upper earnings limit is £6 different to the monthly multiplied by 12. It is. That's just how it is for directors. And what about all this 11.5% deduction when they've had 12 and 10 for so long? So, but we'll go into that sort of complexity. Salary sacrifice is one of our most popular training courses. It really goes into the nitty gritty. Not for everybody, I'd say, because it takes quite an understanding. So it's a bit of a challenge there for think if you'd like to understand how they operate. Why? I've just seen in social media this week someone asking questions about the fact that an employee wants to claim 45p for their salary sacrifice car scheme because, of course, it's their own car. No, it's not. It's a company car. You won't get 45p tax and NI free for doing the mileage in that. There's a lot of misunderstanding. So come along. It really goes into some detail and explains it and what it is. And there's a whole series going through, I think, mapped out to February 2024. So there's other opportunities if that's of interest. Come and get your SD Works education badge.
There you go. Absolutely fantastic. Right, over to our resident pensions expert. Also, your opportunity to... Sorry, Andy.
I just wonder why there's no pensions in that, Simon. Do you think it's important?
Apparently you weren't available, Andy.
It's very important. So we'll schedule in any time you want, Andy, all right?
I don't mind. I'll do something for you. Yeah, definitely.
Well, let's do a session on pensions. That'd be great. It wouldn't necessarily be a training, would it? Be a multiplicity of different things, wouldn't it? Of education and information.
There you go. Heard it here first. We'll talk about pensions, Andy. It's your turn now. So we've had a few pensions questions come in. So this is people's opportunity to put their questions back in my box here regarding to pensions. I'll give them to Andy in just a moment. But Andy, I wonder if you can give us the latest updates in relation to pensions that people might help people with their payroll processes.
The thresholds for next year are remaining the same. So there's no change to the lower and upper thresholds or the trigger at which you get automatically enrolled at. So that's the same. So you probably hopefully already know that. There was the private members bill last year about introducing the changes to automatic enrolment, where the age would go from 22 down to 18 for triggering, and that the lower threshold would go to nil or abolished. We're just waiting for DWP still to issue their consultation. And in that consultation, obviously the detail will be there, especially around the timings as to when will these changes come into effect. So watch this space, and when it does come out, I'm sure we will be talking about it in the appropriate PQT at that point and feed in to the consultation, so you know so that DWP can take into account your views. We've already mentioned the lifetime pot. We are doing this value for money thing, which I say we could end up closing down pension schemes that aren't offering value for money. So the members of that pension scheme will then go into a new pension scheme, transfer across. The other thing is the pensions dashboard, which has what they call a connection date of the 31st of October 2026. So pension schemes with at least 100 members will need to connect to a dashboard no later than the 31st of October 2026. And there's a staging profile, a bit like automatic enrolment with employers. So the larger pension schemes will need to be able to connect from basically, I think, August August next year, I think. No, August this year. So August 24 is when it all starts to come into play. And then different schemes will have different scheduled staging dates. It's not a legislative mandated thing, but it's something we would expect pension schemes to make sure that their schemes are ready to connect to the dashboard. So at some point, as individuals, we can log into this dashboard and see all our pensions and know what it is we're likely to have as a retirement pot potentially. So that's probably all from me in terms of pensions, apart from the questions to be answered, I guess.
Okay, great. Well, actually, no questions come in. Maybe they were asked already during the course of the show. But we were talking at the beginning of the show about the week 53, Simon. It's a hot topic section now. We thought this might be a good opportunity just to run through some of the questions you've seen on social media recently. And perhaps if people on social media have got those questions, maybe some of our listeners do too. Over to you.
Yeah, sure. And I'm sure I'll tag with Karen, if I may, on some of the aspects of this one, Nick, as we go through. And I think it goes back to a couple of topics ago that we're discussing about the tax advice market, but there seem to be lots of people concerned about the tax affairs of their employees. And we've seen lots of people saying, oh, what do you do for week 53? Do you do this or that? The position with week 53 is everybody's going to get an extra 1 week or 2 weeks or 4 weeks, depending on whether it's 2 weekly or lunar payroll, of free pay associated with their earnings. That can impact universal credit claims. It can impact all sorts of things. But this year, of course, because it's a leap year, we've got 2 days where it's possible. So in effect, the number of these has doubled. So we've got the 4th and 5th of April. So any payments on the 4th and 5th, especially as one of those is next Friday, we'll have a week 53 or a week 54 or week 56 case, depending on where the cycles fall, which means that they get on a week one, month one basis an extra element of free pay, which they're not entitled to. And so I guess some employers are trying to prevent it and stop it and saying, what should we do? Now, the official answer from HMRC would be, if you forgive my slightly northern humour, that I'm a Barnsley boy, is mind your own business type response. Operate what you're told. So your software should handle it. The SDWorks software certainly does, and there is a specification which says what you do with week 53. The problem with that is the individuals are likely, I'd say between October and January next year, to receive a P800 letter saying you've underpaid tax. And their instinct is to contact their employer and point the finger and say you've done something wrong, when absolutely you haven't. However, it does have that impact on your individuals. I'm sure it can be coded away or they'll just get a small bill. For the 53s, it's usually quite minor. I could say no tax bill is ever minor, is it? But for the fortnightly and the lunar cycle or 4 weekly cycle, it could be significant. And that four weekly cycle only really occurs every X number of years. It's quite low, whereas the weekly occurs every few years. And so the frequency is more. But because this is a leap year, you'll have more cases, probably double the cases you'd normally see each year. And so they're worried about it. So we're seeing in your WhatsApp group, Nick, people are saying, oh, we're changing all our tax codes to week one, month one. What are you doing that for? There's a week 53 calculation. It will just do it. You leave the tax codes alone. Only HMRC issue tax codes, employers don't. And others are saying, well, we're changing all ours to 0T to stop them having the free pay, because then the tax will be right. Well, it doesn't fix the 20% band, the 40% band, because you'll still have 53 periods of it. It's kind of, and why? HMRC haven't. So it's that kind of thing that's just thinking, what are you doing? Is that impacting anybody that's on the call here? But generally, the plea from myself would be just let your software do what it does. It's doing what HMRC require, and doing something else is us, in effect, interfering with private tax affairs is a little bit. I can understand the desire to help, but sometimes there's an element of help is just over the line.
Very good. Anything you'd like to add to that, Karen?
I completely agree with Simon. Please do not do it, because you could impact in a negative way. Because at the end of the day, only HMRC know people's tax affairs. We do not. We know what tax code we operate, and that's it. So I would make the same plea of not to do it. The one thing I would encourage is, I appreciate time's ticking on badly now, is where you know you're going to have 53s, 54, 56s, is perhaps write to your employees, or if you're an agent, maybe just remind your clients for their employees that you cannot do anything about it. The code will be the code, and the software, as Simon says, will sort it out. And where there is an underpayment, yes, employees will. But if they're educated in advance that this might happen, but it is just down to the very nature of the way pay-as-you-earn works, then that's it. So I know that payroll, and certainly even bureaus, will desperately want to help. But on this occasion, you just can't. You have to follow the rules, because you could make it worse.
Well, and there's some risk as well, Nick, because if you go around changing the tax codes and they have an underpayment, and HMRC write to them, they can say my employer did it wrong, whether they did or didn't, and whether that change was right. But the HMRC would then say, what's this tax code here? We didn't issue that. And then the employee can say, you see, it was an error of my employer. And then they'll issue what's called a Determination 80, which transfers the liability to the employer.
I think you said, Andy, in that when we were offline, there's also an auto-enrollment consideration here.
Yeah, it depends what type of pay reference period you have in place. There's two types of pay reference periods for automatic enrollment. One is what I tend to call a calendar. So like the 1st to the 31st of the month, or Monday to Sunday if it's weekly paid. So and that's what you do. You just pay people Monday to Sunday, paid, like the following Friday, that sort of thing. But if you're using the alternate method, which is tax periods for your pay reference period, so you've got, week 1, 6th to the 12th, week 2, 13th to the 19th, whatever it is, then you need to consider what you're doing, because now you've got a true week 53. There's always a week 53 for automatic enrollment purposes, because you've always got that single or 2 days. If it's a leap year, which is your week 53, but it can just consist of one day. And if there's no payday on that one day, then you haven't actually got a true week 53, you just got a single day. But when you have got a true week 53, someone could get enrolled in that week. And then, because they turn 22 on the 8th of April, for instance, and that's their enrollment date, then you start the new tax year, week 1 starts, you reset your calendar, and that's the 6th of April. Is beginning of week 1, but that person's already in the pension scheme. They got enrolled in week 53. So you take a normal full contribution. But the system, your payroll system might think, they're turning 22 again in this week. So it's just an interesting fact. The person's already in a qualifying pension scheme. So it's just making sure that what happens in week 53 continues in week 1. And if you postpone individuals to the start of the following period, if they trigger for the first time, the start of the following period takes them to the 6th of April, because that's where week 1 starts. So if someone triggers on the 8th of April, because that's their 22nd birthday, you're then going to postpone them to the 6th of April. Well, that's nonsensical. So you probably would have to postpone them to the start of the 2nd week. So an interesting challenge for software. But if you haven't got tax periods, weekly tax periods, if it's monthly, it doesn't matter. If it's weekly tax periods, then you have got the possibility the system doesn't do things properly. Yeah.
So an interesting one for software, but actually you probably need to trust the software, as Simon was saying. It's their responsibility to get ahead of the curve on this stuff, right? And they know what they're doing. So sometimes we don't want to overcomplicate it, as Karen and Simon also mentioned. Excellent. Well, listen, thank you everyone for joining us. While I'm here, I'm just going to mention as a little bit of a plug, because of course this show is republished both on the Payroll podcast in audio and also on the new YouTube channel. If you go to @the Payroll Podcast, you'll find this live on YouTube as well. There's a new episode out today. So if you're not familiar with the podcast, there's one today on demystifying pay transparency with Nita Letting. We've got other episodes coming up, which may be of interest to our listeners. We've got episodes from Anna Lau and Ian Hodson talking about making payroll more strategic. We've got one coming with Angela Wagner about payroll big picture thinking. Anne-Marie Bawayan on global payroll and AI. We've got another one on payroll tech investments. and even one with one of my colleagues, Tom, who's launched JJ Recruitment in the US on the state of the US payroll recruitment market. So if you're not currently subscribing, please do go to Apple or whatever your favorite podcast platform is and subscribe there, where you'll also get a copy of this audio we've recorded today once we've turned it around, edited and republished it. So you can get this again on audio and listen to all of our fantastic panel relive their responses today to all the topics that we've covered, or you can, of course, watch it on YouTube if you prefer. Just leaves me to say as well, our next PQT is going to be on the 25th of April. As registrations are open very soon, so please do go to sdworks.co.uk/PQT. Please do recommend this show to your colleagues and friends. If they work in payroll, I spoke to a couple of people on a different HR channel this week who had no idea this show existed, and I believe there's an extra 4 people have joined us today after discovering it. The HR managers passed on to their payroll management colleagues, and they've joined us today. So thank you. I hope you've enjoyed it if you attended, and we look forward to doing the next episode real soon. Just need to say a huge thank you to Simon, to Karen, to Andy for delivering another expert panel to all of our questions. We're finishing slightly early today. My name is Nick Day, and thank you all for joining us on Payroll Question Time. Have a wonderful Easter. We'll see you soon.